I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined as always by my triple threat co-host, Brett.
That's right, Alice. I'm a three-tool player or something. I don't know. I don't know what any of those words mean.
Sure. It has nothing to do with that. I was going to say trifecta, but that doesn't really make sense. Really, I just wanted to put 3 in there because we are on week 3 of the Delphi trial. And it's not going quite as long as we had feared, which is good, I think, for everybody. But we are 3 weeks deep into a trial that is not being televised and no recordings. And so we have been trying to bring you weekly updates at the end of the week of 5.5, 6-day trial days to fill you in on what's been going on, because I know there's a lot of interest, and there's also a lot of high emotions because we are talking about the gruesome murder of 2 young girls, Libby and Abby.
And Alice, you make the point about the length of the trial. I've found that usually prosecutors, the government, understates how long their case is going to take, and defense attorneys almost always overstate. I mean, defense attorneys are like, well, Judge, we might call 100 witnesses. We could be here for weeks. And then, they call 2 people and rest. In this case, I think the prosecution finished a little bit ahead of time. The defense is still doing their thing, but I can't imagine they're going to go all week next week, particularly what we've seen so far. So I think we're going to have a verdict by the end of next week.
I think you're right. I absolutely think you're right. And part of the reason, just so you guys know, why the prosecution typically underestimates and the defense overestimates is this is why I think it typically is. The government obviously has the burden of proof. And so as the case is going on, no matter how much you prep your witnesses, it's never like a witness goes on and they just hit the 3 points you have to have them hit. It takes a while. People talk. It may take twice as long, 3 times as long as you think it does. You think it's going to take to get those 3 points out. But usually when you have a witness, you have this big map in your mind of all the elements you need to meet, as is your burden for the government, and that witness needs to hit those points before they get off. But people like to talk. People get confused. People may be prepped and still not say what you know they know. And so that's partly why the prosecution often understates. It's not that they're trying to minimize their case. It's that this is a live game, man. You don't know what's going to happen when that witness swears in and then is sitting before a jury and judge.
And you also don't know how long cross is going to go. Because defense attorneys always overestimate their case in chief, but they always underestimate cross. If a defense attorney says, Your Honor, I probably only have an hour of cross. Okay, you'll be here for 4. I mean, but so that's the other thing. It's hard to know how long the defense is going to take, and
That's a great point for that. The government typically is only thinking about their case in chief, not the cross-examination, not the sidebars, not the extra rulings, not people in the jury raising their hands and be like, I need a smoke break every 45 minutes. I'm not saying that's happening in this case, but when a juror asked for a bathroom break, the whole courtroom drops it like it's hot. We're like, yes, go to the bathroom. Which even if it's 20 minutes after the last person went to the bathroom, you have to dismiss the entire jury because the whole jury has to be seated before you can present any evidence. And so that stuff often drags things out without the government taking it into consideration as well. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, and usually prosecutors' cross-examination is much shorter than defense attorneys. Just because, number one, we don't do it as much, so we're not as good at it. But number 2, our case, we're building our own case. So our cross is usually very limited to fixing anything that's been broken and maybe making 1 or 2 points. Whereas really a defense attorney's entire case, I mean, they put on a case, but usually defense attorneys, I'll say this about defense attorneys. We sometimes talk about how the CSI effect and all that and how unfair that is. And we're seeing some of that in this case. Defense attorneys also suffer from what the public expects. The public expects Perry Mason. They expect defense attorneys are going to put on this amazing case when it's their turn. And really, number one, that's not their job. Number two, it's not what they're good at. And number three, you almost never see that. You just don't typically see a really powerful defense case because that's not what the trial is really all about. So you don't typically see that, and that's one reason I think cross-examination on defense witnesses, it just doesn't take as long.
It doesn't take as long. And also, I do think when the defense estimates their case, there's first of all, like, hopefulness, like this case is going to go great for us. And then in response to whatever the witnesses say on the case in chief, we're going to be able to bring like 5 people in to rebut them. It's like, host brings eternal. But in reality, that's usually not going to be the case. And also, you don't want to estimate before the judge and before your client as well. Remember, your client is sitting in the courtroom next to you, charged with a very serious crime. And if they hear prosecution says 10 days, Your Honor, and then you come back, you're like, I don't know, 3 hours. Even if that's all the defense needs, you can imagine your client may think, what the heck? Only 3 hours? Like, do you even care about me? And so there's a level of displaying to your client and to their family members and to kind of just optically, oh yeah, we have just as strong of a case, even though, again, the defense can put on nothing and still win. The burden is squarely on the government. Anyways, that's just a little bit of like inside baseball on why those estimations are the way they are. I don't think anyone's trying to, lie. It is just a reality of the way the burdens fall and also the way trial actually runs. So with all that, this was a busy week in Delphi. Again, we have not been sitting in on trials on the trial days because you have to get in line. My understanding is now people are lining up before the trial day is over for the next day. And so we have been reading all the reports, listening to all the different commentators who are waiting in line, getting in there. And this is our take, sitting back a week, not doing day by day, to give you what we think is happening in trial. But so far, the prosecution has rested this week, meaning that their case in chief is over, and then the defense has an opportunity to put on their case, and they have chosen to put on I think 2 days of witnesses now. Saturday is a half day, 2, maybe 3 days. I've lost count. 2.5 days.
2 total because Saturday is a half day. So yeah.
Right. Because they started on a half day.
Right.
And here is something I want to say real quick. The defense does have to be very limber because you don't exactly know when your witnesses have to go. And you will see this, and we even face this as the prosecution when Brett and I go to trial. There is no dead time allowed. The court is not going to recess just because a witness finishes early or another witness doesn't come. So sometimes your witness order or who is going on the stand is based solely on who is available at that moment. So I only say that to say that happens more to the defense and the prosecution because they don't exactly know when their witnesses have to go. So there may be rhyme or reason to the order in which the defense is putting their witnesses on. It may also be that if you have a gap, sometimes the judge will say, well, then you must rest your case, defense. And that's a real threat.
And I don't want to just keep talking shop here, but these are all interesting things. There was one point, the press, and I think even Murder Sheet talked about this, where it seemed like Baldwin was just stalling for time. And I think some people were like, well, if he's done with his witness and doesn't have any other witnesses, why doesn't he just say, Your Honor, I don't have any more witnesses. Why don't we just end early today? The judge can say, call your next witness, counsel. Your Honor, I don't have a witness available. So are you resting? I mean, you can be put in that position, and sometimes judges will be like, great, early day, see you tomorrow. But that's always, whenever you have that situation where something happens and a witness isn't really available, it's nerve-wracking because judges can hold you to that. Like, we're here, call your next witness. If you don't have a witness available, congratulations, you're done with your case. So I think maybe you see that happen sometimes.
Yeah, that's happened to me and Brett before, and it is nerve-wracking. So with all that said, let's dive in because there were a lot of witnesses this week, and we're going to go back to still the prosecution's case in chief before they rested this week. So there was a DNA expert. I know a lot of us have been talking about, is there DNA? What DNA is there? What is happening here? Well, there were many different swabs, and to the extent any male DNA was found, because remember, we had the one hair strand that was familial and female, And they didn't do further testing because no female family member was a suspect. So to the extent any male DNA was found, it was relatively minuscule and not sufficient to test with our current technology. And we know that the girls were given rape kits and DNA on the external genitals, and under some of the girls' females were found, but
Fingernails.
there was no sign. Huh?
You said females. I think you meant fingernails.
Did I say females?
You did.
I heard fingernails. Is this like really? This is like one of those out of body moments.
Remember, Alice is
I
about
was
to have
like,
a
yeah,
baby,
Brett,
so
fingernails.
give her a little, cut her some slack.
We're so sorry. We're recording this Saturday when we should be recording Sunday, because I texted Brett earlier and I was like, look, I walked like 5 miles during Halloween. We might not make it to Sunday, so why don't we do it to Saturday in case I don't make it? So sorry if I sound a little scattered, because I definitely am. Okay, sorry. There was DNA on the external genitals and under some of the girls' fingernails, who are female, but it's fingernails. And there were no signs of sexual assault. It's possible, if not likely, that this DNA is actually transferred from someone else, because obviously if this is a sexual assault or fighting back, I think you would expect to see a lot more DNA, say, under the fingernails. If there were sexual assault, you'd expect to see a lot more DNA than what was actually found. And this transfer could be anything from laundry, sharing clothes. We've already seen some of this. If you wash clothes with other people in your house, that DNA can transfer. If you sit in the same car, you shed the same hairs, you use the same bathroom, you sit on the same couch, these sorts of things, especially if you live with family members, you can see that type of transfer. Now, there was a possible hit for semen, but no sperm and no male DNA. This confused me in the Robert Wong case, but it confuses me when I hear that here as well. But remember, these tests are prone to error because they're not actually looking for semen. They're looking for an element within semen, which can be an element found in something else. That's what I mean. I'm no doctor, but like the idea of semen without sperm or male DNA seems almost impossible, which probably means it's hitting on the element we find in semen, but it's not actually semen. Now, the hair in Abby's hand, which the defense made a lot of hay of, turned out to be, you can imagine who it is, Kelsey's, Libby's sister. Remember, Kelsey drove them there. She told Libby to take an extra sweatshirt because it was cold. They lived together. Their clothes washed together. There was one swab they took from the girls' clothes and found enough male DNA to get a profile. And they thought they had something, which was encouraging, but they put it in CODIS and everything, and unfortunately, it was later determined to be someone from the lab. So in other words, it was an error in testing. That person, while they were testing, got their own DNA on it. Contamination happens. People are people. And the reason they put all this on is everyone wants the CSI effect. Everyone wants DNA to just say, that's our killer, or he's not our killer because we have something else. And they say all this to show you you're not always going to have DNA. There's all these other elements at play. And they talk about the difficulties of recovering DNA, which is trying to debunk that CSI effect, especially when you're talking about exposure outdoors in an outdoor crime scene where there's water involved, leaves involved, etc. There was also so much blood that it's almost impossible to recover any touch DNA on their body, which, let's pause for a moment. I know that we're talking about scientific things. That's devastating. We as in the public, did not get to see these hundreds of crime scene photos, but my understanding is those who have seen it in the courtroom, it was incredibly gruesome, incredibly bloody. Just like any other water. The amount of blood, I'm not surprised at all that they couldn't really get any DNA. And remember, the girls' clothes were quite dirty. Now, this expert, of course, was cross-examined because this is like the defense's chance to be like, aha, you have nothing on my client. And they point out various cutting-edge technologies that might be able to help the trace amounts of DNA that were collected, but not enough to build a profile. And the witness noted that trying those tactics would destroy the evidence, and it was unlikely anything would come from it. And we've talked about this in our episodes with Othram, where if you can always consume a DNA sample, but when you have such small amounts and you know you're not going to get anything from it, then you are wasting that DNA sample and kind of foreclosing the opportunity to use the actual developed technology in the future.
Yeah, and I'll just make 3 points here. The first is they didn't find really any usable DNA from anybody. Obviously, somebody killed the girls for whatever reason, the various things Alice talked about. There's no recoverable DNA, and that's just a fact. And that's just something that the prosecution's going to have to overcome. Now, I will say, you would expect that if the girls were not killed by one person, but two people or an entire, coven of Odinists, there would be more likely to be some DNA than if you just have one person who's pretty covered up who kills the girls and sort of gets lucky. That's the first thing. The second thing, and this goes for podcasters, YouTubers, journalists, random people posting online. If you are out there suggesting that Kelsey or one of her family members is involved in this case, you are not a warrior for truth. You are not a sleuth. You're not some sort of open-minded person. You're an asshole, and you should be ashamed of yourself. That's the second thing. Third thing, and this one got me. Alice, we do this a lot. We're both in law enforcement. If true crime is to be believed, we spend, 75% of our time framing people. I mean, we do a lot of framing. And we get a lot of experience in it. And I would think the police have a lot of experience in it. And I'm really disappointed in the Delphi police and the ISP because they went to all that trouble to switch out the bullet when they realized it was Richard Allen. We learned that from the defense in their cross, that they switched out that bullet, that they didn't film 365 days a year so they could frame Richard Allen. But somehow they forgot to just put some DNA on the evidence. How easy would it have been to just frame him that way? And yet they forgot. So I think I'm going to have to add this to our trainings we do with law enforcement, that from now on, when you do your framing, make sure you include some DNA.
There's so few opportunities in life where you actually catch me off guard. That was one of it. I'm sorry. I hope you heard that because I was laughing.
And of course, I'm not serious, but once again, if you're out there thinking this is some sort of conspiracy, it is as most conspiracies are. It's a very strange conspiracy where the framing element is one that is, controversial and can be attacked, and that jurors don't know a lot about, when you could have just framed with DNA, which everybody knows about, and which is like a slam dunk, right? I mean, if Richard Allen's DNA had been found on the girls, I assume even his most ardent defenders would probably say he's guilty, though I'm sure some of them would say it was planted. But I think most people would say that. But the fact that you don't see that, I think, cuts against this notion that there's some sort of frame job going on here.
And let's be clear about what this witness is. In, I think, another world, another time, this witness would not be necessary. Because essentially this witness got on the stand and was like, I have nothing to add. The reason this witness is testifying is because everyone expects DNA to be so transferable, so collectible, and so easy to be able to build a profile of anybody. People truly think, and we find jurors who think this, someone walks into a room and they breathe, and all of a sudden there's like a perfect image of who is in the room right there. If you go into a room and you breathe, your entire DNA profile is there, and we'll be able to tell for all time that you've entered this room at this time and you weighed this much, etc., etc. And that's just not the truth. So this expert is truly to show the whole process of what it's like to collect DNA. And here's the thing. If in fact this scene has been tampered with by police, I don't think anyone's actually suggesting it. This is in the outdoors. You would find so much police DNA. The only male DNA they were able to build a profile of is contamination from the lab. And that's because that person actually handled the sample. You're not finding errant DNA everywhere of all the policemen there who were very sloppy in collecting DNA. The fact we don't find more like errant DNA shows you actually how careful they were, and still they couldn't collect DNA.
So let's talk about Let's talk about Major Patrick Cicero. He testified about the deaths of the girls, and this was some pretty difficult testimony. He was the same officer who testified at the 3-day hearing this summer. He did blood spatter analysis. It was very emotional. He talked about how the area where the girls were found is like a bowl or a depression, so the girls were kind of down in that. He talked about the bloodstains on the trees, how they appeared to be from Libby's hand reaching out to the tree after she had already been attacked, sort of trying to stumble towards it, stabilize herself before she fell to the ground and died. There was a large pool of blood in front of the girls, which all of this just blows away this notion there wasn't a lot of blood at the scene. This was a very bloody scene. One of Libby's feet had blood on the bottom, which indicated that she walked on her own blood before she died, which I think also goes to the notion that this did happen there. There were many images of the girls' bodies that were shown, showing the flow of the blood, bloodstain patterns on their bodies. Libby was mobile for some of the attack and was likely sitting for one of the wounds. The blood on her hands had congealed and dried. Her face was covered in blood, but there was a break in it caused by a tear. There were smears of blood on her hands and wrists, which is also common because the instinct is to try and stop the flow of blood by putting your hands to your throat in a desperate attempt to save your life. It's likely that Libby was moved after her death. It was confirmed that given the location, the temperature, and the time of the year, it is not surprising. There was no predation and very few insects. It was also said that Libby was dressed when she died, given how much blood was on her clothes. So, devastating testimony, but I think absolutely necessary and a reminder for everyone out there who treats this like a game. This is not a game. This is not a mystery to be solved. I mean, this is a horrific tragedy.
Yeah, we don't. Those images that I haven't even seen are seared in my mind, and we don't need to spend more time on it, except to know this. We are seeking justice for two brutal, brutal murders. There's just no other way to put it. And this is why the victims have to be at the center of everything. So, moving on to Richard Allen. The prosecution plays 2 October interviews with Richard Allen. This was the first time the jury really heard Richard Allen's voice. Remember, they heard the video from Libby's phone that captured the guys down the hill. And so now, during trial, Richard Allen doesn't speak. They're not supposed to. You just sit there. Now is kind of a moment of truth. They're going to hear Richard Allen's own voice. Does it sound like Bridge Guy? Now, we didn't hear it. None of us do because it's not broadcast to the public right now. The problem is that the voice is so enhanced and was only a few words long, so comparing them is difficult. Guys down the hill, very few words, a lot of inflection. It was very difficult to hear if it was not enhanced. So once it's enhanced, if you've ever touched up a photo, you know that touching things up just kind of blanches it, right? We listened to the murder sheet, and Kevin and Anya, the hosts of Murder Sheet, they said it sounded like Bridge Guy. They shared that they talked to other people in the courtroom who also agreed. I don't know. We didn't hear it ourselves. But in the video, Richard Allen talks about wandering around because he's looking at the fish since he likes to fish. And then he says that he sits on a bench for a while and then he leaves. He's very relaxed when he's talking to law enforcement. He says he's not going to be somebody's fall guy when they continue to ask questions about exactly where he was, what time, why he's doing these things. And as the conversation starts to get out of his realm of comfort, because he's there to tell his story, which is like looking at fish, looking at a stock ticker, no big deal, I leave. When the follow-up questions become more targeted, and it's clear that they're trying to ask targeted questions to see if he's the murderer, he starts to get upset, and they talk about searching his house. Then he starts getting very agitated. And this is something really interesting that we've heard from multiple reports in the Richard Allen interviews, is when he thinks he's just talking, he's not being interrogated, apparently he's very relaxed, and he's in control of the conversation. I think most of us would be relaxed when we're driving the narrative. But the second things get heated and more direct about the murder, he gets very agitated. I would say this is very normal. This is why you have good cop, bad cop all the time. People tend to say a lot of things when they think they're just talking to a friendly voice. But when they think they're being interrogated, even if you're not guilty, you start getting agitated. So when they talk about searching his house, Richard Allen says that he's not an angel and he doesn't want them looking at every website he's looked at. And most of us would probably have the same sentiment, to be honest. I don't want people looking at my search history or my house. And he says that he watches Dateline every week, but he repeatedly denies any involvement in Abby and Libby's murder. But throughout this entire interview, he never asks for a lawyer. But he repeatedly mentions talking to his wife. He wants to see his wife. He wants to talk to his wife. Where is she? And he also throws out there, he's like, I have like psychological issues. He says it himself. And he goes on to say he's thought about shooting himself, and he even put a gun in his mouth. Now, the police confront him with a picture of the person wearing the same clothes as he said he was wearing, the bridge guy clothes. And this is when he does the whole, if that picture, bridge guy, is taken on one of the girls' phones, then it wasn't me. And that's an interesting framing. He doesn't say, that picture's not me. He says, if that picture is taken on one of the girls' phones, then it's not me.
And, this prosecution team is really good at building their case. You notice, we've talked about this before. This came up with a previous witness. Well, they're repeating it for effect. They're bringing out this discussion again, and the jury's getting to see it again, because they really want to emphasize this, because it is a weird framing. A lot of the things are unusual. They talk about how they had the search, and they tell Alan everything they took. Talk about the guns, indoor ranges, going out shooting. This is when Holman talks about how, he's a gun guy too. He's trying to build rapport. And he tells Richard Allen the lab has some questions. And he asks all the control questions we mentioned before, whether he ever loaned his gun out and his clothes out and everything else. And Allen says no. And he tells him that a bullet from his gun was at the crime scene. Allen says, okay. And then he laughs and says, I don't think so. He maintains his innocence. As we said before, Allen is good during his actual interrogations. At one point during a break, one of the defense attorneys is going to sort of say loudly, like, that's what an innocent man sounds like, which, of course, is not the way you should be deciding guilt or innocence, because people can lie convincingly, and they can lie convincingly to the police. And Alice and I have had this experience of seeing this. I'm sure you have too. I thought about, I don't know if you guys remember the Mommy Dead and Dearest documentary about Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And it starts off with the interrogation of her, the initial interrogation of her, where she's still acting like she has all these issues and she can't walk and all this stuff. And the police are confronting her. And initially, you think, what's going on here? And this girl obviously has all these issues. And then as soon as she realizes they've got her dead to rights, she just completely goes out of character. And all of a sudden is admitting everything that happened. And that's the thing about these interrogations. People are able to steel themselves for them, to go in and know, I'm going to, assuming he's lying, I'm going to lie, and I'm going to lie convincingly. And you see that a lot. And I think when you see these, if you're trying to decide if someone's guilty or innocent based on how you judge the things they say, we talk about this in basically every case we do. I think that's a mistake. I think you really need to resist doing that and think about the evidence that you're seeing, not the body language of the person while they're being interrogated. So, as we said, Kathy, his wife, comes up a lot, and Holman tells him, Kathy said that she wanted to go look for the girls, and that Richard Allen said he didn't want her to go looking. And she also told them about his depression, and that it had gotten worse since the murder. And this video also catches interactions between Richard Allen and Kathy. And it's this sort of, he's telling her, you know me, you know I couldn't have done this, I know you know I didn't do this. She's kind of whimpering and crying and talking softly. She says something along the lines of, you told me you weren't on the bridge, which obviously isn't true. He was on the bridge that day, whether you think he did it or not. She asks, how did a bullet from your gun get out there? What are we going to do? He says he didn't have his gun that day. He can't explain it. She asks about the witnesses. He tells her that she's not in any trouble, and all you have to do is ask for an attorney, and they'll let you go. And at some point he tells her, I'm not going to sit here and try and convince you that I'm innocent, though obviously he is doing that repeatedly, sort of telling her, I didn't do this, I didn't do this.
And of course, this is interesting again because he tells, we already heard this earlier. This is, again, very good of the prosecution to bring it out again after multiple days of testimony, that he tells his wife to get a lawyer, but he himself never asked for a lawyer. And he knows that if you ask for a lawyer, this questioning stops. So this is all really, really interesting, especially his communications with his wife, which he knows is being filmed as well. Wait, is it Officer Gallipo?
I think it's Gallipo, yeah.
Gallipo?
I think it's Gallipo.
Okay. I think so. I mean, we can't hear it. We just hear other people say it. All right. Next on the stand is Officer Gallipo. And he is there to testify about the conditions of Alan's confinement, because obviously we know that the defense is going to try and say that the confessions are because of the terrible conditions he's being held in. We already know this from the filings previously. And I don't think that's a bad tactic, by the way. That's why they're having this officer come and talk about what it's like to be in prison. And he says that Richard Allen gets recreational periods. He has a tablet with apps on it, so he has recreation. He has access to the outside world. He also mentions that Richard Allen is on suicide watch, though, because of statements he's made and erratic actions that he's done. And he continues to have visits with his wife, Kathy. And they also mention that he's able to do some of the things you typically wouldn't be able to do in this area. In other words, he's not being treated worse. But remember, it is jail. There are certain things they have to do. They can't just let him do whatever he wants. Part of it for his own safety, because what you hear on TV is true. There are different levels of the totem pole in prison, and child molesters and child killers are the lowest on the totem pole. Like adult murderers, people who murder adults, will try to kill you and shiv you in jail if you kill children, because those are lines that criminals who are self-professed criminals say those are lines you don't cross. And so the fact that he is charged with one of the most notorious double homicides of 2 young girls in this area is not great for him for purposes of protection in prison. So keep that in mind. That is just a reality, and we will see that. That is true. That's not just us saying statistics say he's going to be targeted. We see that he is targeted by the other inmates, and so there have to be precautions taken for him. And then, of course, when you express self-harm, the jail has to do certain things to keep you under watch. And the more suicide watch you're under, the more restrictive your activities become for obvious reasons. Now, he did have suicide companions, which are inmates who are basically buddies to watch out for you. And these can be inmates or they're correctional officers, but they spend all their time with you. So they hear what you do, they're there for you, basically. And Officer Gallipo says that over time, Richard Allen gets more and more erratic. He starts doing things like ripping up his mail, defecating in his cell, washing his face in the toilet, and just acting in ways that are, you may say, crazy. And he also then said Richard Allen starts confessing on multiple occasions, and sometimes even in writing. They're not just words coming out of his mouth. In fact, Rick sends a note to the warden, and he says, I am ready to officially confess to killing Abby and Libby. And in another statement, he explained that he disposed of a box cutter in a dumpster. Box cutter is not something that was previously in discovery. Now, the cross-examination focused on how terrible the conditions were for Allen's confinement and how it drove him to confess. Again, I don't think it's a bad tactic. We knew that was going to be the case. But the problem is there were so many confessions by Allen, and they were heard not just by the guards, if you think there's some sort of conspiracy by the guards to frame him. They're heard by many other people, including recorded jail phone calls with his mom and his wife, and other inmates hear it. And he says things along these lines, and we don't hear all 60 plus confessions, I don't think. We hear enough of them to see just how specific they are. They're not general allegations of, yeah, I did it. He says things like, I killed those 2 girls, so I have to kill myself. He says, Dear Lord, forgive me for molesting Abby, Libby, and Kevin and Chris. We don't know who Kevin and Chris are, but he is. We talk about this in some of our, like, when you evaluate truthfulness of confessions. We have people who tell us way more than we even know, and that is a sign of like trying to unburden their load and trying to make amends with like their creator, essentially. So take that with what you will. He also says, God, I'm so glad no one gave up on me after I killed Abby and Libby. And he says, I killed Abby and Libby all by myself. Nobody helped me.
And other times he's saying things like, Kathy, I did it. I'm guilty. Run, Kathy, run. I killed those two girls. I got what I deserve for what I did. I hope I burn in hell. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for killing them. Kill me. I'm sorry I killed those kids. I swear to God, I killed Abby and Libby. He would ask if he can confess to the warden and to Dr. Walla, who we're going to hear more from later, and a lot of apologies for killing the girls. And one thing we're going to learn is he had sort of a jailhouse conversion around this time. So some of this is related to his newfound Christianity. He had told one guard that he had intended to rape the girls, but he panicked and ended up killing them instead. He told someone else that he killed the girls with a box cutter and threw it into a dumpster behind the CVS. Now, that he used the box cutter and disposed of it at CVS is a recurring theme. He told several people that. He told one guard the girls were screaming when he murdered them. It's actually interesting and maybe good for the defense because nobody heard any screaming. There's no evidence of that. Whether they were actually screaming or not, I don't know. You can imagine sort of what was happening at that time. And I think one thing that you should remember, even assuming Richard Allen did this, number one, you'll never know exactly how it went down. Number two, I don't know that Richard Allen knows exactly how it went down. I think this was a panicked situation. I think his memory is probably pretty cloudy. And we hear this a lot. You hear this a lot from people. Remember back to the case we spent like 10 weeks on. Leo Schofield. Remember the Leo Schofield case? When Jeremy confesses, he actually says that, he remembers the first part and he remembers the knife. But once he starts stabbing Michelle, he goes into a rage. I mean, he basically, you've heard the phrase seeing red, right? And the next thing he remembers, basically, she's dead and there's blood all over the place. That is not uncommon. So to some extent, I think wanting sort of a coherent statement from Richard Allen that makes sense from A to B and includes everything that happened is not going to happen, whether he did this or not. So I think that's something that's important to remember.
And one thing to note about the he saying, is that even grammatically correct? Richard Allen saying that the girls were screaming. Remember where they're cut. Their throats are slit. You can imagine that maybe they did start to scream, and that's why they're cut where they are. If the killing was happening faster than he intended or didn't intend at all. So it's very possible that in his mind they are screaming, and that's precisely the type of injuries we see when someone's trying to silence someone, which is to cut their voice box. Okay, so some of these confessions actually come from Rosie's cross-examination, and this is because Rosie, or the defense, wants to draw out all of the confessions and show, like, you can't believe what he says. Because Richard Allen also said that he killed his family and his grandchildren, which obviously didn't happen. I don't think he has grandchildren, for one. I think he has one daughter. And this was smart of the prosecution on redirect, because you can imagine what the tactic is, okay, maybe he said, I killed those girls, but he also said, I killed everybody, like the Leo Schofield confessions. And so the prosecution then tries to show that when he said he killed his family and his grandchildren, he means this metaphorically. What he's saying is he's destroyed his family because of what he's done, which is also, I think, a pretty effective redirect of it. Now, most of these 60 confessions do come from the Westville facility, which was earlier in the case. So you can say maybe that was early on, maybe he was having some mental issues then, but there were also confessions from just this year, a few months ago, when Allen was moved to Wabash Valley, and the purpose of moving him was to give him better conditions. At the confession from this year, Allen said, I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for killing those girls. Now, a lot of other things came out that we don't dig into, or the prosecution doesn't dig into. We don't know if it's true or not, but Allen also said that he molested his sister and that he may have molested his daughter. He doesn't remember whether he did or not. And he also claims that he was raped by his babysitter when he was 11 years old, and that he was molested by his grandfather. So, if those are true, that's not the center of this case. Those could not be true, and it doesn't matter. But if anything, it may show kind of him coming to terms with why he did this horrific thing, which is like, I'm not in complete control of my own trauma.
And I know a lot of people want to know, they want to know that. It's natural to want to know everything. It's natural to want to know why. And one of the things that some people have said is, Richard Allen was this perfect angel before this. Why would he do this? Maybe he was. Maybe none of this is true. But if it is true, you kind of see how this went. And it's very sort of stereotypical. It's very, just typical. It's pedestrian. You see this a lot with people who were abused when they were young, when they grow up. That not everybody who's abused when they're young becomes an abuser. Absolutely not. Some of them do. Some of them do things like molest their daughter or molest their sister or molest other people. He's mentioned other names, and a lot of times molestation moves up to rape, moves up to murder. It seems like, if Richard Allen's telling the truth, this was the escalation. It was supposed to be the escalation to rape. And he was going out there to rape those girls. And then things got out of hand, and it turned into a murder. That's sort of the story he's telling. If that's true, this is not, I hate to put it this way, but this is not an extraordinary case. It's typical.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. After we heard the recaps of these confessions, I immediately texted Brett and I was like, the sad thing about this case is just how incredibly ordinary it is. You want it to not be ordinary. You want to think that there is some monster somewhere, and this can never happen to any two girls going on a hike in the middle of the day in a public area. But this story, unfortunately, is a tale as old as time. And it sunk my heart like to the bottom of my stomach when I heard it, because I was like, this is so ordinary. This is so sad, because it happens every single day. We've made a circus of this case, but unfortunately, this sounds just like another guy who had inclinations and he didn't think about anybody else. And here's the thing. I have my own theories about whether he intended to kill the girls or not, but you can imagine any person would go crazy if their intent was just to molest or rape, and then it ended in a double homicide. That was one of the most gruesome scenes you could ever see, with girls screaming, voice boxes cut, stumbling around in their own blood, grabbing to trees, trying to stand up. It would drive anyone mad. So I also have theories as to whether he's really mad or whether he's malingering in jail when he's doing things like defecating in his cell. But just that can drive anyone mad, whether they plan to do that or not. This is a horrific scene, also for Richard Allen to process over and over.
And one thing I want to say, because one thing that a lot of people have wondered is, why has the defense not made this more about Richard Allen? Why haven't they talked more about Richard Allen, painted Richard Allen as a family man, et cetera, et cetera? And that's a good question. But remember the rules of evidence. The rules of evidence, we've talked about Rule 404, and how Rule 404 says that prior bad acts cannot be introduced to show that your actions in this case were in conformity with those prior acts. So you robbed a bank before, you're on trial for robbing a bank. We can't just say, well, you robbed a bank once, so you must have done it now. But if the defendant puts on their own character, presents their reputation for truthfulness, or their, one that you'll see sometimes in self-defense cases is their reputation for peacefulness. I'm a peaceful man. I would never act first, so this must have been self-defense. Well, if they do that, then the prosecution can turn around and start bringing in all this evidence of all the fights you got into, stuff that you wouldn't normally be able to bring in because it's Rule 404 stuff, because you've put it at issue. And so I kind of wonder if the defense is a little concerned that if they go too far into who Richard Allen was and how great a person he was, that might open the door to some of this other stuff. That is pure speculation. I have no idea if they have other stuff. But when you're wondering, why haven't they told us more about Richard Allen? That could be a potential reason.
And it could be that they don't have witnesses to testify.
Also possible.
Right? There's going to be a real gap if mother, wife, and daughter don't testify. I don't know that they refuse to testify, but you can imagine if you're going to talk about Richard Allen and any of those three don't testify, especially because we have them on recordings of him confessing to them, that could open up all of their conversations, could implicate marital privilege, and they may know a lot more that could be damaging than would help him. And they may just not want to create that hole for the jury and say, well, you're having all these, like, I don't know, CVS customers say he's a nice guy every time he hands over his pictures, but, like, what about the wife? What about the daughter he said he molested? So it is a difficult strategic decision of what you want to do. I have no idea why, but I do think the jury probably is wondering a bit why and who Richard Allen is.
So Allen also said, I'm not crazy, I'm only acting crazy. He told other inmates that, which is the kind of thing you might say if you're crazy. So I don't know how much we can put into that. But the guards did testify that he would primarily act up around his lawyer visits, which I think is interesting. And I'm sorry, I will always believe that post-conversion for a few months, he really did want to plead guilty. He wanted to admit what he did. He wanted to confess. He wanted to apologize to the family. He would meet with his lawyers, and his lawyers would say, Rick, you don't need to do that. We got a solid case. Just sit tight. We're going to get you through this. And they would sort of talk him out of it. But I think that sort of mental strain was one of the reasons he was having these issues. I mean, remember, some people want to say, well, look, he was having mental issues, so we can't trust the confessions. Maybe. Or maybe the confessions come from this immense stress he's under and the guilt he's feeling because of what he did. And I think that's consistent with this notion that he's having these issues when his lawyers come. And we're going to see some discussions he had with his family, which I think also go along with this notion of him sort of telling people close to him, I really want to do this, and him just continuously being sort of pushed, no, stay the course. So Monica Walla would testify. She was a big witness, controversial witness. She was treating Allen. There's no confidentiality in this circumstance. And some of y'all wonder that. It goes state by state issue in Indiana. You don't have any confidentiality. She did think he was faking some of his more extreme stuff. She thought he had mental health issues. But she noted things like he would do things like not eat. But he'd only skip 3 straight meals because he knew that if he skipped 4 meals, that would trigger a reaction from the prison. That's when they would start to take steps. And so that sort of thinking through sort of your craziness sort of indicates that maybe you're not crazy. And I thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah. And so Dr. Walla testified to, she was a really big witness because he confessed in great detail to her. And because there is no privilege there, then she gets to repeat it all to the jury. So Richard Allen told Dr. Walla, I killed Abby and Libby and I'm sorry. And he's in tears when he says this, showing remorse. And that he killed them himself. There was nobody else. And he made sure that both girls were dead because he didn't want them to suffer. He intended to rape the girls only, but he had visited his parents the morning of the crime in Peru or Mexico, Indiana, and they invited him to lunch, but instead of going to lunch with his family, he gets a 6-pack and he drinks 3 of the beers, and he goes to the trail. That's when he says he sees the girls, and he follows them to the bridge. He wasn't sure how old they were. He said that they could have been anywhere between 11 and 19, but he didn't care. He mentions that he, quote, did something with his gun, which is when he lost the bullet. So he's aware of this bullet. Remember, he's been told of the bullet. He's explaining how he lost the bullet, or he thinks. And he said he was just going to rape the girls, but a white van drove by on the access road, and this freaked him out. This white van is a big one because it's a detail that he gives up himself. And this white van is located. It was owned by Brad Weber, who later confirmed that indeed at this time he did drive by in his van. Now, when he sees the van, Allen forces the girls across the creek, and then he cuts the girls' throats. He then covers the girls' bodies with branches, and this is another fact not generally known until the defense issued its Odinist theory. But it's interesting that Allen says branches, since generally speaking, they have been described by others as sticks, even though they were indeed branches.
And yeah, I mean, we didn't know a lot about the condition of the girls until after the Odinist thing. Now, some people are going to say, well, Allen had access to Discovery, so maybe he read the Discovery. It seems like most of the time Allen was eating his Discovery, so I don't know how much he was actually reading it. But, maybe he did pour through Discovery before he ate it and saw that about the branches and included that. I will say this. If you assume he is having these mental issues, but nevertheless, despite the mental issues, and this is such a difficult needle to thread for the defense, because he has to be having mental issues that are causing him to confess. But he isn't just saying, I mean, he does sometimes just say, I killed the girls. He does say that sometimes. But other times, he's telling these very detailed, chronological things with these little minor details in it. And so you got to believe that despite his mental illness, he's able to put together a false narrative with all these details in it that fit the facts of the crime. And that, to me, is very contradictory in a way. So I don't know how you mesh those two things, frankly.
And by the way, this confession that is told to Dr. Walla, she doesn't clean it up. It's actually told in a very coherent, streamlined manner. You don't always see that when you see someone in the midst of psychosis. They may have parts of truth, but it's usually hard to follow what they're saying. There's a lot, it's either out of order, things don't make sense, but the way, at least she testifies he told her, is very methodical. You see exactly what's happening, and it's actually very clear-headed, more clear-headed than most confessions I've ever heard.
And obviously, you cannot overstate the White van part. I mean, it's absolutely damning. If you guys have followed any cases where there are false confessions, the thing that you'll always see from people who are false confessions experts, I'm going to take the West Memphis Three. What is the thing they say? Every single thing in the confession is something that was provided by the police. There's no details in the confession that only the murderer could know. The white van thing is, number one, a detail that only the murderer would know, but also it is such a minor detail. And it's difficult to imagine how Richard Allen could have made it up or how Dr. Walla could have fed it to him. To me, this is very similar, going back to the Leo Schofield case. This is very similar to Jeremy Scott's confession where he mentions throwing the car into park. And how, that's such a minor thing. If you're just making up a story of murdering somebody, you're including this very minor detail, but it also happens to be a very minor detail that solves something else about the case. In that case, why the car was damaged. In this case, why he was interrupted. And number two, a fact that he could not have known, a minor fact that he could not have known unless he was there. So even if you're trying to figure out a way where, despite the mental illness, well, maybe it's some of the medication he's taking is giving him enough lucidity to create this story, and he poured through Discovery and he put this story together because he really wanted his confession to be convincing. Even if you're saying that, this tiny detail that apparently would not have been available to either person is inexplicable and it makes it really hard to discount the confessions, no matter what. Even if Richard Allen were stark raving mad, which, by the way, they never did any kind of competency examination on Richard Allen, by the way. I mean, we keep talking about his mental health issues, but they never did any of the things you would expect if that was the case. But even if it were true, even if he were stark raving mad, number one, that doesn't mean his confession isn't true, particularly when he is able to give you a detail he shouldn't otherwise have. So Allen also said that he was selfish, that he was a coward. He wanted to apologize to his family. He wished he could go back in time. He wanted to talk to his wife. So Wallace set up a call. And during this call, Allen asked his wife, and we're going to see these calls, if excuse me, Allen asked his wife if his family still loved him and if they would continue to love them. He told them, look, I might not have done everything I said, but I did kill Abby and Libby, and apparently this is one of those times where Kathy Allen hung up on him.
Yeah. Okay, so we talked about this like jailhouse conversion apparently he had. So apparently in March of 2023, Allen becomes a Christian while in jail, and it seems that many of his confessions are tied up with this conversion because he wanted forgiveness and he wanted to go to heaven. And he wanted to provide closure for the family. He also told Dr. Waller that he needed to let his wife go. He was doing things like sleeping with his Bible. And she testified that when Allen would confess, he had a smile on his face. This seems consistent with the trying to make amends so that he can, absolve himself of all these sins. And Dr. Waller also said that she told Richard Allen repeatedly, stop confessing. It's not good for your interests. Stop confessing to me. Stop confessing to everybody. But despite these warnings, Richard Allen continues to confess anyway.
So she also confirmed that around attorney visits or reviewing discovery is when his condition would decline significantly. She said that once he started receiving discovery materials, they switched from inmate companions to guards to avoid any inmates seeing the discovery, which is interesting because some of the inmates heard some of these confessions. So going back to the whole, how much does the discovery have to do with it? He would do weird things, sexual things. He would apparently masturbate in Wallace's presence, which isn't great. He said he wanted to kill himself, but he was too much of a coward. And he also told her that he wanted to sign a confession and end it. And she said, look, you need to talk to your attorneys, not to me, about this.
So during cross-examination, the defense brings out that Dr. Waller was into true crime. Honestly, I saw more headlines about this than her actual substance of her testimony, but the substance of her testimony is so important.
Which is good for the defense.
Okay.
I mean, if people are focusing on things other than him giving a detailed confession, that's a good thing.
Absolutely. And look, this line of questioning is great because, of course, what are they trying to paint her as? They're trying to paint her as someone who is really excited to be part of a real true crime case. They bring out that she accessed pre-sentence reports related to Keegan Klein, who is not part of this case, but obviously, as we know, pre-trial, there was talk about whether he was tied to this case or not. This is bad. She should not have done this. Pre-sentence reports are sealed, and they're only available basically on like a need-to-know basis. We get them as attorneys for our own clients. I guess I can access other people's pre-sentence reports, but I really shouldn't to access them unless I'm using them for court purposes. This is something that you can get fired for, and Dr. Waller did suffer some minor punishment for it. They basically move her to a different prison after she does this. It also comes out on cross-examination that she listens to podcasts about the Delphi murders, which it's like a list of podcasts that Rosie reads off. Yes, we were one of them. So were a lot of other podcasts who've ever covered Delphi. She said that she had an hour and a half commute, and so, like many people, she listens to podcasts. She would tell Richard Allen that she listened to podcasts, and there were people out there who supported him, so don't lose hope. Now, the defense did not attempt to address how Allen could possibly have known about the van. So, again, it's really good for Richard Allen if the news is only covering the fact that, Dr. Waller's listening to podcasts about Delphi and not focusing on the van. I don't know what hit with the jury. Hopefully the prosecution comes back around, and they've been hitting on the van. We're not in court. What's on the news is not necessarily what's being emphasized in court. But they don't even try to address this because I don't think they can. I think they would only dig themselves further into a hole. And you see this often. If you know you can't rebut something, sometimes it's safer to just stay the heck away from it, which is what they do here.
So Steve Mullins is recalled, and this is a really interesting recall. You may recall him. He is the person who talked about looking through the video, looking for traffic passing the trails. He finds this 2016 Ford Focus with the spoked rims, which was consistent with Richard Allen's. So a juror had actually asked him if he searched records to see how many other black 2016 Ford Focuses were registered in the area. And at the time, he had not. But as we always say, the investigation is ongoing. So he gets off the stand, and what does he do? He goes back and he looks into this. And he finds out that over 2 years, around here, 2016, 2017, there were 18 registered. When he narrowed it down to Carroll County, which is where Delphi is, there was exactly one. 2016 black Ford Focus registered in the area, Richard Allen's. So on cross-examination, it was suggested that maybe somebody not from the area could have visited, which is 100% true, obviously true. But nevertheless, you got the registration and the spoked wheels. That's pretty powerful. And I got to think that juror is feeling really good about themselves. I mean, this was the way that juror is now like almost like an investigator, right? So that was smart of the prosecution to go back and do that.
Absolutely. So Brad Weber, the driver of that white van, testifies next. This is very good ordering, by the way, by the prosecution, because you have, Richard Allen's own words essentially bringing up the white van, and then bam, we found the white van. So he's the person who lives off of the access road near the crime scene, and he does indeed have a white van. He was working between 6 a.m. and 2:30 p.m., and on February 13th, the day of the abduction and murders, he clocked in at 5:41 a.m., and he clocks out at 2:02 p.m. And it takes 20 to 25 minutes to drive home. And he would have thus driven his white van down the access road at precisely the time Richard Allen later said a white van spooked him, and fits perfectly with all the times we have from the witnesses who see Bridge Guy, and also Richard Allen's own testimony of when he was here in the first instance before he tried to change the timeline of his time on the bridge. Baldwin cross-examines Weber, and he tries to challenge Weber's timeline. He says that he made a stop, and so that could have thrown the timeline off. But Weber says that's not correct, and Baldwin gets pretty upset and starts yelling at Weber. And he eventually gives him a subpoena to testify during the defense's case. Brad Weber is not an expert. He's not like a lackey for the prosecution. He's just some guy who has a time card that's like pretty clear what time he clocked in and clocked out, and he drives a white van. So it's a little unclear what the attack on Weber is going to be. I honestly, if we had to guess, it's probably because he talked to an investigator during a general canvass and said he worked on ATMs after work, while now he says he did that during work. Of course, this investigator pulled a lot more information than a general canvasser would, so I can imagine it's just jogging his memory better. But Weber doesn't come off, or at least from his testimony, it doesn't seem like he has some like dog in the fight, and he wouldn't know how to manipulate his timeline. We have the time card, we have his normal drive. He says, no, I normally just go from work straight home. And again, this seems to fit with the timeline that Richard Allen himself tells Dr. Walla.
So at one point, the defense wanted to play a call that they thought was favorable to them. Can't do that. It's hearsay. The prosecution did play calls, all of which were damning to Allen. And Murder Sheet talks about how striking Bridge Guy's voice was, and I will give you a quote from them. After hearing Allen's voice, they said, "This is the voice of Bridge Guy." We didn't hear it. I'm sure there were people in there who heard it and thought, doesn't sound anything like Bridge Guy. We'll just have to see what the jury thinks. They're the ones who are going to be listening to that. Just real quick, if you're the defense, you can't play a call that's favorable to you. And the reason that's hearsay is because your client is not a party opponent. And since they're not a party opponent, that exception doesn't apply. And if it's something that's good for you, it's not a statement against interest. So that exception doesn't apply. The prosecution can play the defendant's statements, but the defense can't. This actually came up, you may recall, in the Murdaugh case. So, more hearsay lessons for everybody. Okay, so now we're at the calls portion. And so we've heard, suicide companions. We've heard guards. We've heard Dr. Walla. But now the jury is actually hearing these confessions, or they are hearing confessions for themselves. So we'll just go through some of them. We are repeating to you, basically, listen to what Murder Sheet said about this, read a bunch of what other people said about this, and tried to come up with what sounded like the best the best transcript. This is the ultimate game of telephone. Probably going to get some words wrong. You'll get the gist. The jury heard the calls, so good for them. Maybe one day we'll all be able to hear the calls. Probably will after the trial's over, all this evidence. Anything that's not sensitive, like pictures of the girls, that kind of thing, will probably be available, and you'll get to listen to all these calls in the inevitable Netflix special, which I'm sure will be coming in the next year or so. So November 14th, 2022. This is obviously very early in this process. I think Allen was arrested in like October of 2022. So this is 2 weeks or so after the arrest. He's talking to his wife. He and his wife are crying. He says something, if this becomes too much for you, call the detectives and I will tell them everything they want to. And then people disagree on what this was. Either know or hear. Some people think that's significant. I actually don't think that's significant. I mean, I guess know is more like he's telling them what he did, whereas hear could be he's just trying to make them happy. But you could also say, tell them what they want to hear because they want to hear what happened and you're going to tell them. So I don't know how significant that is. People argued about this as if it was the only confession. I don't know, but we'll go on. And maybe the jury is definitive on what he said. There was a lot of talk about how much he loved her. He didn't want her to worry about him, that all he does is worry about her, and let everybody know how much he loves them. He's sorry that he can't help, that he can't do anything to make her feel better. He's sorry. There's just one more thing he effed up for her, and that he'll see her in the next life and to take care of the family. Now look, this once again is 2 weeks after he's arrested. I don't want to, as I said, I don't like to get too much into how would you react? How would a guilty person react? How would an innocent person react? And all that stuff, because I think that's the fool's errand. But nevertheless, it's 2 weeks after, and he's already talking like he did this, he's going to be convicted, he'll never see him again. This is certainly not while he's in the depths of his despair in prison, as we're going to see later. This is just when this is all starting.
And that's a really good point, because this is so early in the case that the Odinism theory hadn't come out with the defense yet. It's possible that the defense hasn't even really gone through their discovery yet. He hasn't really seen things. He doesn't really know the case against him. He doesn't know the tactic against him. He just knows what he knows, which is apparently what he's confessing to here. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of the timeline. So fast forward to a call on April 2nd, 2023 to his mother. He says, I've been trying to get a hold of Kathy. And his mom says, weather has been bad. And he then says, if you talk to Kathy, tell her I'm okay. And are you going to church? Because his mom has started going to church. And then Richard Allen starts crying. He says, that's good to hear. Remember, apparently his conversion came in March of 2023. And he asked, did Kathy tell you I accepted the Lord Jesus as my Savior? She says, oh, that's wonderful for you. And Richard Allen says, I've got a family that's always going to love me no matter what. We'll all be back together eventually, maybe when we're in heaven. Then he gives a call to his wife the next day, April 3rd, 2023. He says, I want to apologize to you. I did it. You know I did it. I killed Abby and Libby. And she says, no, you didn't. And he says, yes, I did. I don't know why. And she says, no, you didn't. I don't know why you're saying this. You're not feeling well. They've messed up your meds. And he says, maybe I did it. I think I did it. No, you didn't, she says. And he says, is there a way to talk to Brad? They're screwing. No, sorry. She says, is there a way to talk to Brad? They're screwing with you in there. I think I did it, he says again. Why would you say that? She says. And he says, because I did it. I want to apologize to the families. So there's a lot of back and forth, essentially him saying, I did it, and her saying, no, no, you didn't. Ping-pong back and forth.
And look, the timing here is interesting because he's had this conversion, obviously. Typically, if confessing your sins is one of the things you have to do. And you would think this goes along with that. Now, as we're going to see, he's going to do a lot of confessing, and his family is going to do a lot of pushing back on him. So May 10th, 2023 is another call to his wife. She's on her way to meet Brad Rosie at a gas station for some reason. Not entirely clear what it is. She says that he thinks maybe I've lost my mind. She says we've all lost our minds at this point. He asked, can I trust Baldwin and Rosie? And she said, yes, they're your lawyers. And he says, I need to tell you something. And she says, are you sure you want to do that over the phone? Which, by the way, it is not unusual at all for people to confess and to say incriminating things on a recorded line. We see it all the time. It would blow your mind how often this happens. And, I'm always fast forwarding through the first 5 minutes of the call because it's basically repeating over and over again This is a recorded line. Everything you say can be used against you. This is a recorded line. So he heard that, and yet he still wants to do this. She's smart enough to say, do you really want to talk about this right now? He says, I need you to know I did this. She says, what? And then she says, there's no way. He says, do you still love you? Or, do you still love me? She says, I still love you, but you haven't done anything. He says, I'm definitely going to lose my mind now. I'm just trying to be at peace with this. I had a dream that I have to let you go, and I have to let you know I did it. She says, you didn't. There's no way. There's no way. The call ends. So this is a repeated thing. He is constantly attempting to confess to various people in his life, seeking reassurance from them that they will still love him even if he did it. And these people refuse to accept that, he did something like this. Another call to his wife, I think on the same day. He says, I need to know if you still love me. She says, yes, dear. And he says, and everyone else will as well, because I may have to spend the rest of my life here. I just have to know that everyone is still going to love me. It's true, honey. She says, no, it's not. It's true. No, it's not. I just hope you still love me. If I get the electric chair, it's not going to happen. If it does happen, will you be there for me? Which, I mean, I know a lot of people have a very negative view of Richard Allen's wife at this point. I feel so much empathy for her. I can't imagine having a conversation like this and having it multiple times. And now you're talking about whether or not your husband's going to get the electric chair. So she's obviously crying. I mean, she spends most of these calls apparently crying. He says, it's okay, honey. I did it. I killed Abby and Libby. No, you didn't, she says. Stop saying it. He says, I know I should let you go. She says, we're going to be back together. He says, love me no matter what. Will you always love me? She says, please stop talking. And the call ends.
And it doesn't stop there. So in another call to his wife, they start off with a little bit of small talk. And he says that someone has put money in his account and he doesn't know who. And Richard Allen says, I feel like I've lost my mind and gone to hell. And Kathy says, we're all here. And he says, you know that I've done it, right? And she says, I want to have a good conversation. Then Richard Allen complains that no one will talk to him or be honest with him. And they then talk about the chaplain and the chaplain talking to him. On June 11th, 2023, again, he calls his wife and he says, there's no small talk. They just dive in. I did it. And she says, what? He repeats, I did it. Do you still love me? She responds, yes, dear, but you didn't do it. Why do you say that? Why do you say it? And he says, I don't want to upset you. I'm already upset. I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like I lost my mind. And she again says, you can't call me and talk this way, okay? And he says, I'm so sorry, baby. Why are you so mad at me? And she responds, I'm not mad. I'm upset. I guess I'm just going to have to stop calling you. I'm sorry. So, at least in his speech, Richard Allen doesn't seem to be under duress. His tone and his cadence doesn't change whether he's talking about the weather or murdering children. The I did it's and the confessions are not like rantings mixed in with a bunch of other things like the government's watching me or, something like that. They all follow a very consistent pattern, and we're hearing the entire call. The entire call is essentially him trying to confess and feeling like he's not heard.
And once again, we haven't heard these calls, so we're going based on the reporting. But I mean, the content is not great, and here's the thing: people they're gonna dive through these calls and try and figure them out. The reason these calls are so bad for the defense, or one of the reasons, remember the immense pressure that's on this jury. The jury is trying to do its level best to decide this case based on, is Richard Allen guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? But they know there's 2 dead girls. They know he's been arrested for it. They know if they acquit him, he's free forever. And they hear him saying he did it over and over and over again. And it is really hard. Very difficult. I wonder how often it happens. It'd be interesting if there are statistics on this, where you have a confession, and not just one where some random guy, like a jailhouse snitch, is saying he told me about it, but you literally hear the man's voice that you're looking at say, I did it. and yet you acquit. I can't imagine that happens that often. So these are incredibly damning for the defense, and I think a lot of people have been hard on the defense for the presentation they have made. They are in a very difficult place. Their client has really put them between a rock and a hard place. And I will tell you, if you're a defense attorney out there, you're nodding your head because you've experienced this, and I've seen it before too, where we'll have a close case and we're lining up the evidence, or I'll tell you what happens a lot. We have a hung jury. If you have a hung jury, the very first thing you do when you get back to your office is you call somebody and say, pull the jail calls. And you pull the jail calls and you have somebody listen to them. And you would be surprised how often on one of those jail calls that nobody's listened to, they're actually confessing, which then you can use in your next trial. And a lot of times defense attorneys are excited, they're ready to go to trial, and then they're like, hey, got some late discovery, just listen to the jail calls. And you can feel they're like, oh, because they know what that means, right? The jury's going to hear that. It's going to be really hard to convince them otherwise. So in August of 2024, investigators are reviewing Dr. Walla's report. So going back to Dr. Walla. And it includes this detailed confession about this white van. And this detail about the white van stands out to them because they think, like all of us do, that is such a minor thing. If we could confirm that, that would be a big deal. So they go looking for it. They look into reports on the access road. Who lives on the access road? They find Weber. They run Weber and find that he owns a white Econoland van. They look up his work history. They look up when he clocked in and clocked out that day and discover all the things that we've talked about earlier. They look at Google Maps to figure out how long it would take him to get from Subaru to his house. They determine it's about a 25-minute drive. Now, prior to this, there were no reports. There was no discovery. There was nothing mentioning the van. So there's no way that Richard Allen could have known that someone on that road owned a white van that just so happened to be driving by at the time police believe the girls were murdered, and that he says he sees the van. So, and there's no way that Walla could have known about the van. So if you think Walla is somehow feeding this to him because she wants to be a star in the true crime case of the century, there's no way she could have known about the van. The only way you can know about the van is unless you got incredibly lucky with a minor piece of information, or if you were there that day and saw the van, just like Richard Allen says he did.
I mean, this van is really hard to see how Richard Allen is not the person who killed Abby and Libby. It is a hard fact to overcome here. So, of course, you're going to have to cross-examine. And Rosie does the cross-examination, and he brings out with Harshman that there's lots of tips in this case, lots of comparisons. So how could he possibly know that the voice of the bridge guy is Richard Allen's? And he also points out that Harshman only joined in 2020. He then goes on to suggest that maybe Brad Weber was the murderer, not Richard Allen. And then he also, there's literally nothing. He has a time card too. He's like gone the entire time. Then he asks Harshman, didn't Richard Allen confess to shooting the girls? Which we obviously know is not true. But what comes out is that Allen never said he shot the girls. That was an inmate companion, not from one of the recorded confessions. So it's possible that someone who heard Richard Allen confessing just got the details wrong. And they also disagreed with whether there was any false information in the confessions. Harshman said no, his confessions were all accurate. Any inaccuracies were potentially like a game of telephone, like we've talked about. Now, on redirect, the prosecution played the May 17th, 2023 call. This was between Allen and his mother, and she asks, "How are you?" He responds, "All right, I guess. It's good to hear your voice." Then he asks, "Did Kathy tell you I did it?" Again, jumping straight into it. She responds, "Well, we're not going to discuss this, okay?" And she says, Are you here?" He responds, "I'm still here." And his mom says, "We love you. You know that, don't you? Regardless." "Yes." And he asks, "You know if Kathy is okay?" His mom says, "She is. I've been worried you guys weren't going to love me because I said I did it." And she responds to that with, "You're not in a good place. Just saying it doesn't mean you did it." And he says, "It does when I did it." She then responds, "Don't talk like this. They're just messing with you." And Richard Allen again responds, "No, Mom, they're not. Mom, I wouldn't tell you I did it if I didn't. We're not going to talk about the case," she says. And so he then says, "So if I did do it, you wouldn't love me anymore?" And she responds, "I'll always love you no matter what." Rosie then asks questions about Richard Allen and his behavior in prison. And on redirect, the prosecution wants to play a video with Richard Allen screaming that he's going to kill the guards, etc. But the defense objects, and the video was excluded at that time. Presumably, unless they argue Richard Allen is a peaceful man, it probably won't come up again.
Yeah. And we'll just have to see whether or not at any point they open the door for that. The jury did have some questions here. People generally held in jail or prisons. The answer was jail. Obviously, we know why he ended up being in prison, which, I don't know how much the jury knows that, and it might be worth bringing it up more, especially as we're going to see with the defense case. When was the first phone call confession? April 3rd. How many vans traveled down Weber's driveway? The answer was it's a private drive, so none. So at this point, sort of with Mom's call, which I think is a pretty powerful one, the state rests.